Hi there, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Banter and Beans, and joining me is Ben Kinsley, who is my co-host. And Ben is going to talk about this morning Act 73, and it's he's attacked it in sort of two ways. First was finance, which we've done, and you may want to look that up. Today we're talking about governance and what Act 73 said about the governance, which is another important topic that's
Yes.
never goes away.
Well,
Take it away.
this is the hotly debated topic in Act
Right.
73. This is the one everyone's talking about, right?
Yeah.
I actually think the governance changes are more important for long-term education spending trends. I think that is actually going to be more impactful. So I definitely go and watch that show. Campaign for Vermont has done research, and there's a very clear increase in spending when we implemented the current funding formula. And I think the new one fixes a lot of those challenges. We've grown at twice the rate of the national average for education spending for the last 25 years because of that foundation, that old formula. And so definitely go watch that show because it's important. But the governance change is the one that's getting all of the media attention because people are concerned for justifiable reasons.
Right.
So where we are is, and again, for context, I think it's important to say that we've been on this consolidation train for 15 years now, right? We had Act 153 in 2010, Act 156 right after it, and then Act 46 after that. And that's all three of those bills were obviously Act 46 is the best known one, but all three of those bills were focused on school district consolidation, incentivizing it, and Act 46 to some degree mandated it. And there's a lot of evidence now that Act 46 did not save money. We're 10 years into it now, and there's not a lot of cost savings. And there's real impacts on the ground where people feel like they are losing control of their local schools. They don't have input anymore. We're breaking those community school connections, which we're also coming to understand are more important than we previously thought. There's good research from in Massachusetts around the importance of community connections and engagements with local schools, and how they benefit both the school and the community. And so, we're sort of on the whole Act 73 discussion is sort of on the heels of the experience, the lived experience of the last 15 years of school district consolidation in Act 46. So I think that's important and why this issue is getting so much attention. So I think, basically what Act 73 did is it created a task force to study the consolidation of different governance structures in the state. Most people assume that means school districts. The bill doesn't actually explicitly say that. It says governance structures. And in fact, this task force is supposed to come back with 3 different maps. Well, up to 3. They have to provide at least one, and they can provide 2 additional maps for what the new governance structures are going to look like. And it actually says the one map they're required to come back with has to have a combination of school districts, supervisory unions, and supervisory districts. It has to contemplate the usage of all 3 of those. So, to say that this is a pure school district consolidation effort, like that may be the way people are talking about it, but that's not explicit in the language. So it's sort of important to talk about. And so this, and also to get the context here, in 2010, we had 270 or so school districts. Throughout those consolidation efforts, we're now down to 119 school districts, right? So we've cut that number by more than half. And we saw spending increase as a result of that, not decrease. And there's some reasons for that we can talk about, and maybe that's its own show about why consolidation would increase spending because that doesn't make sense to our 21st century American brains, right? We think
Right.
bigger is better. Um, it's got to be cheaper if it's bigger, or whatever it is. And the reality is 80% of education costs are in
Salaries.
staffing salaries.
Yeah.
So salaries and benefits. So if you don't reduce staffing, you don't cut costs in our education system. And Act 46 did actually not decrease staffing levels. And so that's important to understand. And also something we've communicated to this task force is like you need to look at that question, because and you can reduce staffing without consolidation. Like you can do that. And actually there's another section of this bill that does do that, where it establishes class size minimums instead of, like, you think about class size maximums. We want small class sizes. But actually, this bill establishes minimums to gain efficiency, and those minimums are more in line with what we see nationally as best practices. So that's something to note here. In terms of what these new governance structures are going to look like, there are some guardrails for this task force. So they need to be between 4,000 and 8,000 students. By default, we have about 80,000 students in the state. So that means we're going to have between 10 and 20 of these new governance structures. It's going to be somewhere in that range. Now, interestingly enough, the task force has had 2 meetings now, and they just asked some members to go draft the first 2 maps they're going to look at. The first map is county-based, which is going to be 14
Yeah.
counties. The second map is based on career and technical education center districts, which is one of the other criteria that the legislature asked this task force to look at, is tying the regular secondary education system with our CTE education system. And so this second map is based on CTE districts, which there are 15 of those, 15 CTE districts. So that is important. The other sort of criteria that the legislature gave this task force is that to the extent possible, it should equally distribute the grand list values and student count and student demographics. So you're not grouping a whole bunch of like students together, like special needs students. Like you're not putting them all in the same district,
Right.
basically. Same thing with poverty. You're not putting all of these students with poverty in one administrative structure. Um, and also to minimize disruptions to students, follow current district, town, other governance structure boundaries as possible. The first 2 maps check that, right? We have a geographic county that follows a county line. The second one is an existing career and technical education center district. That's an existing governance structure line, and that's something that the commission is looking at, or the
It
task
sounds
force is
like
looking.
it sounds like they haven't focused on the governor's proposal, which was 5 districts, which to
Yeah,
me is just so huge given our terrain. I mean, you'd never go to a board meeting. It'd be
yeah,
like an hour and a
exactly.
half ride.
Exactly. It'd be like in some cases 2 hours from one side of the
Right.
district to the next, and
Right.
that was unworkable.
Yep.
So the range we're going to be in is between 10 and 20, which feels a little bit better, right? And so the 2 maps that the legislature or the task force has asked for are right in the middle of that range, right? 14 and 15. Um, and so some of the other things that the task force is asked to consider as they're drawing these maps are population distribution, facility location and capacity of those facilities, transportation, staffing levels, salary scales, which is important. That's something that Act 46 did not look at, and why Act 46 actually increased spending. And then grand list values, current spending levels, and debt liabilities. So trying to make groupings that make sense. The big thing, I guess we can touch on it since I just mentioned it, is again, the staffing contracts are going to be really important. So the reason Act 46 cost more money, or at least did not save money, is because Yes, there was some administrative cost savings. Yes, there were, some contract cost savings. And there's a great report, by the way, that was done out of Yale on this. So Yale University, they had a grad student who did a really deep dive on this. We reviewed that report because it's a pretty in-depth report. You can find it on our website, campaignforvermont.org. Check that out because it's important. But this report looked at, like, by category, by spending category, where did Act 46 increase spending and where did it decrease spending? And what we found is that we decreased some spending on administration, on contracted services, things like that. But then there was a big increase in staffing costs. In fact, it was $1,100 per student. In staffing cost increases. And that is largely because when you take a group of school districts and you're like, okay, we're consolidating, and now we need to redo all of our staffing contracts. Well, no one wants to take a pay cut, right? No one wants to, that's just human nature. No one wants to take a pay cut. And school boards who are making these decisions, they're volunteers. They don't want to force pay cuts on people either. They don't want to be unpopular. They don't want teachers picketing outside their school board meeting, right? That's what happens. So what happens is they take the most generous contract out of all the districts that are consolidating, and they level everyone up to that.
Ouch.
Right? So people get a pay raise, like some people do, but nobody gets a pay cut. And that increases overall spending when you do that level up. And that in Act 46 amounted to $1,100 a student. And so that is important, and why, and there's really almost no way around that if you're looking just at school districts, right? If you're looking just at school districts, then there's really no way around that because they are the employer of record. They are the employer of that teacher, that administrator, that, support staff, and so when you combine those business entities, you've got to redo the staffing contracts. And so what we probably should be looking at instead of that, and I think there's some hints at this in the way the task force is looking at this question, is shared services provided to school districts, right? So where we know there were savings in Act 46 was on administration. So if we can move that administration into shared services and even special education, we already do this with special education, actually. But you do transportation, you can do purchasing, you can do curriculum, you can do, various, like AP classes, even move those to shared services that are not being provided directly by the district. They're being provided by another organization. Could be an SU, could be a BOCES, could be a nonprofit provider, whatever. Shared services that this one employer can provide all these services to multiple school districts. And so that, I think, is important because that gets at the cost savings that we found in Act 46. And I wouldn't even get to, like, do HR functions. You can do purchasing, ARAP. You can do all of these things as contracted services to the district if you have this service provider sort of on the side that can achieve that economy of scale, but not have to deal with the teacher contracts and the staffing contracts that are going to increase the costs like we saw in Act 46.
That's where a lot of the money is, right? In the administrative overhead staff.
I mean, the real money is in
big bucks.
is in teaching staff and support staff. Like that's where the real money is. Like, but we do have a lot of administrative overhead. We can realize some of that cost savings by moving some of that administrative overhead and that instructional staff too, because we can think about like things like theater, language, AP classes, like things that you may only have one or two classes and not really need a full-time teacher for. Well, if you have these contracted services where the teacher can move around to different schools, and so you have, a high school class, for example, that meets 2 or 3 days a week or whatever, you can still provide that experience to your students, but not have to take on the cost of staffing that entirely by yourself.
They've only had 2 meetings so far, but are they genuinely taking a look at incorporating the tech centers into each district? Because to me, it's important to get buy-in from the principal
Yeah.
Because there's always an issue of I don't want to send a kid because he takes money with him. If he was responsible for all of it,
Yes.
he might have a buy-in and we may see a shift in more kids going to tech ed.
Yeah, and so you hit on a good point, and one of the two maps does tie into CTEs.
Good.
I think that's important, and I'm excited to see that because Campaign for Vermont's proposal was to use the
Right.
CTEs as the anchor for these new governance structures, and primarily to because it's about the right size to get those efficiency of scale, but still have a local connection.
Right.
Push as many services up to the SU level as possible, supervisory union level, consolidate these supervisory unions around the tech centers. And then, because the supervisory unions are already a service provider for special education, which is one of the biggest costs for school districts. So push it all as many other services up as you can, consolidate the SUs to get scale, and consolidate them around CTEs to get that post-secondary connection. And it also solves a problem on the CTE side, like you said, where we have a dollars follow the student system now. So if a high school sends a student to a CTE,
Same
they
dollar.
lose
Yep.
the dollars for that student. And
Right.
so there's a disincentive for high schools to do that. But if we're tying them to the SU, we bake that CTE cost into the SU, and that
Right.
way the local district is paying for it either way. So the incentive is no longer
Right.
like I'm going to lose the dollars. It's I'm paying for this already, so I should get my money's worth out of it.
It's a hard topic because was it last year or the year before last, the legislator was challenged with finding a way to finding a funding source for tech ed, and they didn't do it. They couldn't come to an agreement, and I thought for sure they were going to come up with something, but they couldn't. It's a tough concept.
Yeah.
What is that? And so if they're in with the public schools, there it is.
I do want to touch, I mean, we're running out of time, but I do want to touch really quickly on how this process is going to unfold. So this task force is going to come back to the legislature with as many as three proposals, at least one, but as possibly as many as three. The legislature is going to take those. They're probably going to tear them apart. They're going to take some of the concepts in it, and they're going to come up with their own map of what these districts are going to look like or what these administrative structures are going to look like. And then it's going to have to pass the legislature, and that is going to be a tall order. And we touched on the financing changes in our last show, and it's important to note that the financing changes don't go into effect until the governance changes go into effect. So they're dependent on the governance changes, and it's going to be really tough to get these governance changes through in the legislature in 2026. It's going to be a very tall order, even if this task force comes up with the perfect plan that almost everyone can buy into, which not everyone is going to buy into. There's almost no plan that's going to do that. But it has to survive the legislature, and it's going to be really tough. And so there's a lot left to happen here. The task force work is important, but there's the legislature gets the final stamp of approval, and they're probably going to pull apart whatever this task force
They
does.
have to. It's in their genes.
Yes, they can't
It's
help
what they
themselves.
do.
Yeah, they can't help
Great.
themselves. So
Thank you very much, Ben. I think we are out of time, and I really appreciate your tuning in. We'll do another one next week, and we'll see you then. Bye. It's Pat McDonald and Ben Kinsley. Drinking. There you go.
listening beyond the no.
What was I saying? Something about bridges. Oh,
Listening
I-
beyond the what was it? That was that.
what did
Was
I do
that?
today? I said something about bridges. I don't remember
No,
why.
today it was